Okay, so welcome colleagues to this TEAN webinar. We're going to share some slides. Richard and I will co-facilitate and get through some slides fairly quickly to open up for more open discussion. But can you be aware that you are being recorded, and we'll share it on the TEAN website, hopefully. Now we can see if I can manage to share my slides. Everyone okay with slides? So yeah, Richard Home at Dundee, Pete Boyd at Cumbria, and we'll get round to the rest of you when we get the chance. So when you first speak, we'll get you to introduce yourselves and where you're based. Richard.
Yeah, so hi everybody. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Home. I'm a lecturer in education at the University of Dundee. It's a slightly different background to Pete. I'm on what's called a scholarship contract at Dundee. We've got people on research contracts or scholarship contracts. So although I do publish, I have more time given over to teaching and kind of program administration. That being said, I get a huge amount out of writing and carrying out research and also working with our students. The example I'm going to talk you through is one from a master's student, which I didn't supervise, but I marked and I thought was a strong piece of research, and we've just recently got published. So that's a little bit about myself. The aims of today, we're going to give you a bit of guidance on writing abstracts and hopefully powerful abstracts that will get accepted, both for publication in journals, but also for conference presentations. And you might come at this from different perspectives. You might have a piece of research that's been put into or submitted to a journal, even accepted by a journal, that then wants to be put forward to a conference, or vice versa. You might be on your way to getting it in a journal and you want to do the conference presentation to develop the discussions and the arguments and ideas and work towards that process. So hopefully we'll be able to cover both of those today. We're going to use an example, as Peter said, from both of us, of recently published articles. Now, these are journal articles that haven't gone into conferences yet. So you're going to help us. I might want to present mine at a conference in the next year. So you can help us work on that and turn that abstract into one for a conference. And then give you a chance to maybe share a draft or an idea that you've got so that you can put something forward for either TEAN or for another conference. So yeah, so that's the aims of the session today. So the first slide we've got here for you, I won't talk through this in great detail, but this is a sort of checklist that me and Pete put together, and we think these are some of the main reasons that you want to present or publish at a conference or get something into a journal. And if you notice the first few points, these are all representative of us making a difference to teaching and education in a practice sense. So a contribution to teacher education, advancing this idea of scholarship, and scholarship, something that's been talked about in universities for a while and is seen as distinct from research, from pure research. It's often discussed in terms of scholarship of teaching and learning in a higher education setting. Now, because our discipline is focused on teacher education, I think a lot of what we do is scholarly in its very nature anyway. Our bread and butter is how do people learn. There's psychology in there might be some cognitive science coming in, there's learning theory. So I think scholarship almost comes more naturally to us in teacher education, our discipline, and obviously making an impact on practice. Now, another important thing that sometimes teacher educators perhaps struggle a little bit with is building networks, collaboration, and working alongside other people, because we've come from schools, often from classrooms where you might have been working fairly independently, and you don't have that background that if you're in a different discipline, you'd worked through your undergraduate degree to a PhD to being embedded in, say, if you're in history or if you're in the natural sciences or something in a university too. And the final few reasons for doing it are what's expected of you to do your day job. Again, having come from, a lot of us coming from education, whether it's early years school-based education, further education, or a related discipline, we're not perhaps familiar with the way in which higher education works. So on a very sort of selfish sense, you might be looking for promotions, you might need to fulfill requirements of your contract or your objective setting system that your employer has, but also alongside that, kind of perhaps the real reason for doing it is this personal satisfaction, the enjoyment that you're going to get out of having something published, out of sharing the research, about making a difference. And the final point, which I think is quite an amusing one at the end there, is sharing the pain with our students. So when we're marking students' work, or we're supporting master's students or people at doctoral level, it's not an easy process. We've all been through it to some degree ourselves. So also we're reminded of that when we're putting together an abstract or an application. So yeah. So I'll hand over to Pete for the next.
Yeah, so
Next point.
colleagues, I don't know what you make of that list, but I think it's very important to point out. I've just been, I'm reviewing for another university an application for a teaching and learning associate professor. So don't forget that if you're in, especially if you're in a new university, there is a promotion track for you. One is as a researcher, one is as someone focused on teaching and learning, right? And as an education specialist, you're in a strong position for that. So, obviously you would have to get, usually you would get a bit beyond teacher education. So you'd be focusing on higher education, generally teaching in higher education. But you've got the background for this. But the thing is, this application I'm dealing with, straight away, there just aren't enough. You still need to publish, okay, for the teach. Most university criteria still require publications from a teaching and learning track professor. Okay, so if you somewhere down the line, as soon as you, for example, if you get your doctorate, if you do your doctorate, you should be thinking straight away, right, associate professor next. So what kind of associate professor do I want to be? Am I going to get really heavily into research, or am I going to focus on teaching and learning, right? And you do still need to get publications. You're expected, for example, you might publish a textbook, a book for the student teachers, a book on how to teach or an aspect of teaching. And then you might publish a chapter in another academic text for teacher educators or something. And then you might publish a paper in the impact journal for the teaching college or something. It doesn't mean that they've got to be all research journal papers, but you do really want a couple of research journal papers and other what I would call impact publications, that someone might actually read, like that kind of thing, like a book on how to make your primary school class effective, or how to make the kids behave or something, something practical, something useful. So watch out for that. Don't assume that if you are going to be you say, no, I don't want to be a researcher particularly. I'm interested in research a bit enough to be scholarly, but I don't particularly want to follow a research track. Don't ignore publication. It's still an important part of becoming a well-established academic, right? And a well-respected academic. You do not have to publish research journal papers, but you might publish one or two of those and then publish things that are a bit more practical. Okay, so is there any questions or comments at this point, right? So we were talking about the reasons for publication. Does that fit roughly with everybody's ambition to go to conference and to Another thing I noticed about that application, by the way, was that there was several conference papers over the last 15 years, and yet none of them have been published. Well, that's a missed opportunity. By the way, hands up, I must have a dozen papers sitting there that I've never published, right? So these things happen. But even so, if you've gone to the trouble of producing a conference paper, perhaps with a colleague, then for God's sake, turn it into a chapter at least, or an article, or a journal paper if you can. Okay, so if you've got the research ethics and you've got everything there for a piece of research, then try and get it published. Try not to have too many bits of work that you've done all that work for and then just stopped and given up on publication. All right, there's just my little bit of a nag. That's all. Just a little bit of a reminder. Okay.
Pete, I'll put in, having gone through that process recently myself for the last 3 or 4 years, I'll put my email address in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to me to talk about that, because I've published stuff in things like the Test Journal, in Scotland's GTCS magazine, that they've got the professional magazine. It's got 50,000, it goes to 50,000 teachers. Whether they'll read it or not, it's no matter, but it's got a wide circulation, and compared to some journals where you might only get a couple of hundred reads, it does get that wider coverage. Yeah. So I'll put my details in the chat if anybody wants to have an offline chat about this.
In England, the Chartered College Impact Journal is a similar thing, where you get a very high impact. You get a lot of readers, okay, who are interested in your topic. I'll go back to the slides to just check that I'm not going to miss anything on my slide. So I'm just going to explain that when you're thinking about your writing, and that we're going to focus on abstracts in a minute, don't worry, we are going to get to that. I've got a handout that I can share with you by myself and Hilary Constable, my colleague. It's a handout we've been working on. It's not published yet or anything like that, but I'm happy to share it with you as a PDF. And it's got these 11 strategies for supporting academic writing. So this is how you might support your students, right? Especially MA students and PhD students, but even your undergraduate students with their dissertation. And what we're suggesting is that you've got to apply these to yourself as well, right? So have a look down the list and see if there's anything you want to ask about, or if you want to, I mean, you can read a bit more about each one in this handout I'm going to send you at the end of the session, but is there anything that you notice is a bit strange, or you'd like to ask about, or you want me to say a bit more about? Just come in on the mic if you've got a question or a comment.
You've got some hand up there, Pete. Rosa's got a hand up.
Oh, go on, Rosa.
Hi, thank you, Pete. What is SPG correction?
Oh, sorry, that's spelling, punctuation and grammar.
Thank you, sorry.
Very poor. Used an acronym, and don't put acronyms in your abstracts, by the way, colleagues. You know, just say what it is. Okay, so spelling, punctuation and grammar. I was obviously trying to cram it into the slide there, I think.
I should have guessed, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's a bit schooly, that one. Okay, so yeah, maybe number 11 is, if I had to pick one thing on here that was important, right? Probably number 11 is very important. Don't try and write things in a secret place. You know, you need a critical friend and you need that friend to be honest with you. They've got to be robust with you. It's no good them saying, "Oh, Rosa, that's really impressive abstract. Well done. That looks great. I'm sure that will get accepted." No, you want them to go, "Well, what does that title mean? And why have you done such a long title? And wait a minute, what's that comma doing there? And what does SPG mean anyway?" Right? So you need to have a critical friend, an actual friend who cares enough to let you know that it's not as good as it could be, right? And so probably if I had to pick one of those things, I'd say set yourself up with some sort of mate, even if you have to just reciprocate between the two of you, even if you're not both experienced, it's better than nothing. But obviously you should try and get, you know, someone who's got experience of publication and conferences to help you. And usually that is usually available. You should have some sort of research mentor or an experienced colleague who might help you. All right. And you're just going to have to be prepared for red ink and brutal feedback, okay? Because that's probably how it will come. All right.
A couple of, I was going to stress the same, Pete. There's a couple of things there that about the resilience, and it's all blind peer reviewed, and I think it's such a social profession and career teaching that we do worry about what people think about us. But the person that's reviewing it, for a start, that, you know, they're going to have everyone's going to have slightly different of opinions of it, but when you're reviewing, you try to take the personal element out of it and not make it personal in the feedback. But equally, when you're receiving it, trying to take that element out of it and just think, you know, this person, try and pick out what they've said about your actual writing and how it might improve it and how it might be developed. And the more you do it, I think the more robust you become and the more almost expectant that someone's going to say something. And if you talk to experienced presenters and authors and people who've published a lot, they'll all have stories of things that have been rejected 3 or 4 times, and then suddenly one journal takes it immediately, and it might be a more reputable journal, a higher impact journal, and so there is a degree of sort of idiosyncrasy in the whole process as well. So just right. Kind of being aware of that
thanks for pointing that out, Rich. I should say to you, colleagues, honestly, when people do blind peer review, they can misbehave. There's something weird happens to people sometimes. As an editor, I see it, and sometimes I have to literally send back the feedback and say, no, that's not in a suitable format to send to the author, you know. So be prepared when you're getting blind peer review for it to sometimes be a bit clumsy, the feedback, and a bit over the top. But I'd suggest what you do when you get feedback, you glance through it, put it away for at least a week, and then open it again. It never seems as bad, right? And as Richard's explaining, honestly, some of my best papers were the ones that got ripped apart at the beginning in the first cycle of review for a journal. And then I got really horrific feedback. But by the end, they were my best papers. So you've got to give credit to some reviewers who do a good job. OK, so try to be. And one way of developing resilience, of course, is relational resilience. So the more mates you've got involved in this, the more you can build a little network, a little group of you, 2 or 3 of you who are trying to do the same thing. Then you can use your mates as a sort of relational resilience. All right. So so that you're not on your own.
That's a good point. And actually, I've written with different people, and sometimes you go through that process to decide whether you want to write with them again and work with them again. And you usually find 1 or 2 people just on the same sort of wavelength as maybe
Right.
subject interest, maybe the timescales they like to work to. It could be something as simple as, you've both
Right.
got kids, and the holidays are the best time for, or there could be something like that where you just
Right.
happen to, or you've got complementary writing styles. So finding people like that is helpful. Debbie's got a hand up, Pete. Do you want to?
Oh, okay, Debbie.
Hello, sorry, give me a sec. Hi, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi,
Fine.
this is all great, thank you. So I'm just very much at the beginning of this sort of whole journey and
Okay.
finding this all really helpful. Read the last slide. I found it really good just to speak to my students and say, look, I'm kind of opening myself up for all this feedback. So not necessarily pain, but the kind of whole reciprocal relationship thing, that's been really great. And just saying, look, the first time I get this, from critical friends, it's hard. Sorry. So yeah, I just have found that really, really useful, and just being quite open and honest with my students.
Yeah.
To
And I mean, one of the great things, sometimes first year students, undergrads, they do a thing called meet the professor. And one of the best things that the professor can do when they meet them, they'll say 2 or 3 of them will go and meet one of the professors in the department. And the best thing the professor can say is, well, look, here's a paper. Look, I've submitted this recently, and look at this feedback, and look at the way, because it's about membership of the subject discipline community. Do you know what I mean? So that because you're going through that, you're trying to publish, you're getting feedback from blind peer reviewers, you're kind of identifying with the students really powerfully. And I agree with I like your comment. I think that's very important, that you're showing that you are also a member of, and to some extent you're also a peripheral member of the subject discipline community. So when they submit their essays or their assignments, they're trying to join that community in a typical Levenwenger kind of idea of membership, peripheral membership. So, okay, that's good. Right. So let's get to the more kind of nitty gritty of what we're looking at. Okay. What we'd like to do is strongly recommend a book by Helen Sword. She has got a literature background, but for this book, Stylish Academic Writing, she read, I think, 50 papers from 5 different disciplines, and one of them was higher education research. So there's an educational field in there. And her book is based on her response to that. She looked at top journals in 5 disciplines, and she looked at the papers that have been published, and then she, critiques the writing style. And I really recommend that book. It's about a tenner. Honestly, the chapter on titles alone is worth a tenner, right? And it's so easy to read. It's beautifully written. There's lots of examples of good academic writing in there. And the one I like is this title by Dawkins. One of his early publications was in a biology journal, and he just wrote into the journal with a kind of short letter. But look at the title: Bees Are Easily Distracted. Why do I like that title so much? Well, 1, there's only 4 words in it, so it's concise. 2, you know what it's about. It's about bees. And 3, you've got a hint of the findings, right? You've got a hint of what it's about. That bees are somehow, however it is, they're easily distracted. That is a really powerful title. And this is the guy who went on to, write books like The Blind Watchmaker and clever things like that. Okay, so basically, I really like that title, and I wish more of my titles were short, concise, and attractive to an audience. Because if you were at a science biology conference and you saw a title that said "Bees Are Easily Distracted," I suggest to you that could look quite interesting and attractive. All right, so try to be concise. And if you're doing a teen abstract, try to keep. I think we even give a limit. I think it's on TEAN where we do a limit of something like 140 characters, because we want to put it in the conference handbook in a single line and in an attractive way, so it actually stands out on the page and people say, oh, that looks interesting. I'm interested in bees and how they're easily distracted. I'm going to go and see this one by this obscure young student, Dawkins, whoever that is, right? So make sure you think about that title, and the chapter by Helen Sword is really useful for that. Okay, but all of us have got titles we regret, by the way. So, let's have a look at
the first thing I published. It's the most cited thing, and I worked with 2 colleagues, and we not published anything before, and we gave it a simple title because we didn't know any better, and we called it Becoming a Teacher Educator, and it gets cited quite regularly because I suspect people that are reading up on becoming a general teacher education research, that pops up straight away. My more recent one that you're going to see in a minute is not nearly as snappy.
Yeah, but I mean, if it was right, so becoming a teacher educator, there is another whole science to this, by the way, which is about search words on Google and everything. So that you've got all the words there that might have been, you know, that make it an effective hit, right? But it would, you know, you could have put becoming a teacher educator, and then you could have, you know, used the classic colon if you like, and had some hint of what your main finding was, or what your main emphasis was. But look, you know, yeah, we've all got titles that so perhaps we regretted, but you know, there we go. Right, so back to Richard.
Okay, so we're just going over a few sort of key points about how you might write a powerful abstract. So it's got a lot of similarities, whether this is for the TEAN conference or another conference like BERA or IPDA that Pete's mentioned, or just for it to be published in a journal straight away. So you're thinking about the problem that your paper is proposing, and linked to this is what we already know, what the background is. So you might want a couple of sentences that just sum that up. What is the issue that we're addressing, and what perhaps do we know about that already? And those two can be interchangeable. We can maybe start with what we already know, and then what the problem is as a result of it. What don't we know? And that leads quite nicely into what's distinctive and what's important. So it could be new knowledge. You could have researched something. If it's an analysis of innovative practice, it could be what's different about this, what's the benefit and the value of it. Or it could be methodologically novel and distinct. So you might have applied a different methodological approach. Now, linked to that is you've got your theoretical framework. And those of you that are experienced will know this, but those just beginning, within your methodology, you want to cover two elements. You've got your broader methodology that might include your framework, your lens for analysis, potentially your researcher positionality. There might not be room for that in your abstract, but you know, there might be some space from that if you're taking a particular direction or view of this. And then leading on to your actual methods, and this would be the research methods, the analysis of the data, the way you've collected it, and potentially your evaluation, your findings. Have you used advanced statistics? Have you used descriptive statistics? Is it entirely thematic? Is there a coding process of the analysis? Then you'd lead into your findings, and then sometimes the thing that might get overlooked is why is it important. So this implication for practice links back to the beginning as to what the problem is. So you can almost answer your question from the beginning. Now, if you're applying this to a conference such as the TEAN conference that's coming up and you want to do a presentation, something I quite like to do is I absolutely spell it out and I say what the person's going to get from the session. So I use the word often in this session. And there might be at some conference an opportunity. They had them at BERA this year to do roundtable discussions, or to do sort of sometimes the special interest groups might have focuses on certain things, maybe sustainability or early years education or additional support needs, special educational needs, or particular subject specialisms. So they'll get a group of people in that field together. So you want to almost sell it to them, especially if you're trying to attract an audience to come along and listen to what you're saying. So I quite like personally putting, in this session, you will find out, you will get out of it as well. So there's some of the key points about how you might put together and develop a powerful abstract. So shall we see if there's any thoughts on that, Pete? See if anybody wants to add to that at all, or any comments or contributions to that, anyone they want clarifying? I think Rosa put her hand up there again. Rosa, do you want to?
Super helpful. Thank you. I'm a mathematician. I love bullet points. It really up my street. Would it be possible to share the slides, or because otherwise I'll take a screenshot?
Yeah, we can share the slides, or yeah, I agree. There's 3 checklists on the slides that are worth having probably. So we'll probably gather them together and put them on, share them with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I mean, I think
it's very much sort of moving through the process you'd expect. An abstract is a kind of mini version, isn't it, of your article and it's the same whether it's going to be a presentation. So it's working through that process in that kind of order. You don't have to do it in that order, but I think for most people they'd expect to see it in that order. So it's just a case of summarizing it and breaking it down.
Different conferences will provide guidance, and even TEAN, this might contradict a little bit what TEAN suggests. So, I suppose we just used it, we've used our experience of TEAN for this. if you can see that there's room there for some differences between a research proposal and a critical evaluation of practice proposal. So different numbers might be more emphasised in one or the other. But if you are doing an evaluation of practice, I do think 5 and 6 are relevant. You need to explain how did you gather data and analyse it in order to evaluate the practice and know that it was effective or not effective. You know, so I do encourage you to be clear about that. If it's a research paper, I suppose there's more of an emphasis on contribution to knowledge. What new knowledge is your study offering? Whereas if it's evaluation of practice, it is about contribution to knowledge, but it can be much more practical knowledge than say theoretical or empirical. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll just briefly explain what was going to happen next. So we're going to look at Richard. We're actually going to look at Richard's paper abstract first, and then mine. We're going to talk about those, and we want you to ask questions, chip in, and try and be brave with all that. And we'll try and have a discussion about those two, and we'll take as long as we need on those two, and then we'll open up for more general discussion. Okay. And we can go back to any of the slides. We can go off at a tangent if you've got questions that do that. So let's have a look at Richard's paper, which is a published journal paper, or article paper, but he'll explain how he might change that a bit for a conference. So you'll need some reading time, I guess, Richard.
Richard, I can see you're talking, but you're mute.
All right. I thought you were giving us a nice bit of reading time, so that's fine, actually.
Thank you so much. Yes, you can.
Let's just read it for a minute. I've only read the first paragraph, so I think people need a bit of time. Yeah, don't worry, Richard, it's fine.
As I'm trying to multitask, what I'm doing is I'm also putting in the chat for everybody the links to the two papers. So hopefully they will work, the titles and the links. So you can open them up separately and maybe go back to them a little bit later. So they're the two full papers that I've just posted. So I'll give people a little bit longer, and then I'll summarize for you roughly what it was that we did. So, and if you've read through it, you might want to look at the title actually, because it was only at the final proofing stages where you had to hit send and that was it finalized, that I looked at the title and thought, that's not a very good title, is it? But wait, by which point it's a bit late. So just while people are still looking through that and reading over it, maybe and maybe identifying any key points, this was a master's student who'd done a 3-year part-time online master's course, and they were based in Scotland, and they're a secondary design technology teacher. In Scotland, the technology subject is organised slightly differently, that you, unlike in England where you might be a design technology teacher that possibly does a bit of everything, they're still quite focused on their subject area. So this was somebody that worked in what we would perhaps call more like to work in the resistant materials area, they'd perhaps call it in England, you know, the traditional metalwork, woodwork sort of areas. And the student was, and teacher was interested in finding out how pupils were perhaps being prepared in primary for design technology, and I mean what the continuity was. And the curriculum in Scotland, Curriculum for Excellence, is supposed to provide this coherent journey through primary school into lower secondary, preparing them to go on and do their national qualifications, their standard grade qualifications, before they move on to do their higher. But she was finding that there were problems with the differences between different schools that were feeding into the secondary school. So carried out a mixed methods approach, where there was a questionnaire followed up with some in-depth interviews between primary teachers and secondary teachers to try and identify how coherent this experience was and find out similarities and understanding and differences. The findings, they weren't particularly groundbreaking. As you can imagine, the secondary specialists had a much greater understanding of the curriculum, of particular areas, and some of the primary school teachers really struggled with it. But the overall recommendation that came out of this was that there should be more opportunities for collaboration, for creating a continuous, coherent journey for these particular young people that are moving through this as well. So perhaps one thing to take away from this is even though it wasn't groundbreaking, I don't think this is going to be submittable for the ref. I don't think it's going to be, you know, a 3 or 4 star paper for that purpose. But I do think it was valuable in the fact that it's not really been looked at before. And Scotland's a relatively small country. It's only 5 million compared to the population of England, about 55 million. So to have a specific focus on this subject area gave that level of novelty. So yeah, so that's a summary from that. So what we thought we'd do is try and have a. Well, do you want to do both of them first, Pete, or do you want to do them one at a time? What's the best way?
No,
to do
let's
this?
talk about this a little bit. Let's see if there's any questions about that.
Yeah.
Or any comments, you know. What have I done there? Are we still sharing? Yeah.
Pippa's got a hand up.
Go on, Pip.
I was just thinking it might be useful to raise the issue around use of references, because in a paper like this, you wouldn't in an application to a paper, you wouldn't use references in text citation, but in an abstract going to conference,
absolutely,
there would be an expectation for some conferences, including TEAN, for there to be some in-text citation, but quite limited. And I think that's quite tricky. But
yeah,
also
I think it's important to. I think
Yeah.
it's important to follow obviously the different conferences will have instructions about this, and we've even varied it a bit within TEAN and other conferences that we run. So you've really got to follow the instructions carefully and make sure you're clear on that. And you've got to pick out what you think are good references for somebody who's interested. So somebody who's coming to conference sees your abstract in advance, says, right, that's one I'm going to go and see. And then maybe you're not presenting until the second day. They've got time. They'll go online, especially if any of your references are open access. They can just click on them and get into them. And then, you know, so think about that. Think, right, well, all right, I've got 3 key papers and a couple of books that I could cite, but which are most useful to my reader, right? You know, so if they're open access papers, wow, they can get straight into that. If it's some obscure book that costs 100 quid and is in a hard copy in some library in London, that's not much use to them. So you need to think about key readings when you're asked to prevent, but also you're trying to show the reviewers and the committee, the conference committee, that you have a grasp of key literature in that area. So thanks, Pippa. That's a good point, that these abstracts at the moment haven't got citation because they're published paper journals, and you don't normally do that in an abstract, right? It's only for conference that you do that.
So maybe we ask people what, or maybe Pippa could, where they might, what within this abstract, where the useful references might be. Anybody got any suggestions? I mean, I know where they should be because I was involved with it, but where might be a helpful. If we think about the checklist on a couple of slides back, where we were talking about the different stages in here, so this idea of a problem, you know, what is maybe distinctive or novel, maybe methodological frameworks, maybe key findings, maybe what they're going to get out of it. So any thoughts from anybody? Yeah, so Helen said the method section. Yeah, so I know the methodology that was used. It was initially an online questionnaire, and then it followed up with interviews. So we've got in that second paragraph, that second big paragraph, we've got mixed method research was approached and was utilised in one local authority region. So we can have a reference in there to mixed method research approach, and then the data collected from primary teachers, secondary using online questionnaires and interviews again. So usually it'd be something like Cohen, Mannion, Morrison, or it could be, I'm thinking some of the other Sarantakos social science research maybe. So certainly a couple of references in there as well.
Yeah, but I would have thought the first paragraph is, you know, because like, all right, the methodology could be interesting, but if it's a very general methodology, I don't, you know, I'd be looking, especially in that first paragraph, I'd be interested to know, right, okay, you might give me an online access to the curriculum itself, maybe a curriculum document, and then, but more importantly is that second bit, you know, the views, definition of approaches. I mean, in a way, I'd be looking, because you'd have more words in a conference abstract. I'd expect you to say, you know, previous work has shown this, that, or the other, and that would be the one that I would want to read. I would want to say, right, well, what do we, you know, what studies have happened in D&T before? What do we know already, or what's been happening before? Yeah, somewhere in there. So you'd probably, with a longer abstract, be able to put that in, and you'd cite something, previous research, if you like.
That's, I think Karen and Tracy both said that, and the Education Scotland is the sort of non-governmental organisation that oversees education, and they are sort of custodian of curriculum for excellence. So both of those can be referenced, and the key document, the experience and outcome curriculum document for design technology, is the ideal document to cite there, so someone can go to it straight away and can see that idea of coherence. Helen's also said, Tracy, sorry, has said maybe some connection to DT teaching practice. Now that's an interest, Tracy, you've hit that straight away. When we got to our final stage, it went through 2 or 3 iterations of review. One of the reviewers was really keen to have more about principles of teaching and teaching practice applied, and pedagogy applied to design technology, and this idea of teaching approaches. Now, I don't know if anyone's from a DT background, but it's one of these subjects that there isn't that much research into. So there isn't a huge amount. And when you're looking for pedagogy textbooks to deliver sessions in teacher education courses, there's not much out there really. So that was something we struggled with a little bit. So I think for turning this into a conference presentation, that might be something we want to make more of. We want to draw attention to that, maybe that lack of research and lack of evidence and theory behind pedagogy of design technology.
So perhaps that's where your gap is, isn't it? That's where you identify there's a gap, and then, you know, you're looking for the you know, that's what you're looking to contribute to.
Yeah, and that might be, and that's probably what the reviewers were looking for. And because what we'd done is we'd taken an MEd thesis, which is 15,000 words, and we turned it into a 7,000-8,000 word article, which I thought would be easy, as me trying to cut corners and think it'd be quick. It wasn't. It took longer. It was harder work, which is a valuable lesson for myself. But I learned a lot along through the process.
I mean, I think I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, there are 2 areas that are interesting to me here. One is about teacher knowledge, right? All right, I admit there isn't enough on DT, right? So you might be looking at a generic theoretical framework, and one of them might just go back to Schulman and different kinds of teacher knowledge, right? Yeah. And that, so you could say, right, well, part of our framework for understanding this was they've got knowledge of DT and they've got knowledge of how to teach DT, and distinguish between those, you know, referencing Schulman. But another area would be, like, because we've had so much focus on this in England, is about the curriculum. You know, it's about curriculum design and Ofsted and all this stuff about the knowledge-based curriculum. And so you could have referenced, say, Michael Young, something like that, about powerful knowledge, and said, well, how does the knowledge of these primary and secondary teachers align to powerful knowledge? How do they position that? You know, so there's different possibilities of generic frameworks that still would be relevant, I think, to DT. And in an expanded conference abstract, that's what, you know, that's part of the, I think TEAN reviewers would be pleased to see, that an underpinning of scholarship, a bit of theory. Do you see what I'm getting at? I mean, I'm clutching at straws because I don't know the exact study, but that's the sort of thing I think we might be looking for.
No, absolutely. And what we did was we did look at Schulman, maybe not in as much detail. As I said, I wasn't the supervisor. I think if I'd been supervising, I might have pushed them towards that. But there was a discussion in the final paper. There is reference to Schulman. And also another theoretical element that comes through is this idea of, if you'll notice towards the end, the recommendation is this idea of school communities. And in some local authorities, the cluster system works really, really effectively. But in other local authorities in Scotland, it's not as established, and geographical issues come into it. So one of the other theoretical perspectives we took on it was communities of practice. So again, some reference to that, some idea of how that was suitable, what we might do. And again, we didn't perhaps get deep enough in the article to make clear-cut recommendations about how that might be done, and we touched on professional development a little bit as well. But yeah, that would be, I think, would be an excellent area to
let's get Pippa in then. Pippa.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pete. I was just thinking as well about one of the things with an abstract going to conference is that it also, once it's in the programme, it becomes your advert, and
Right.
you need to encourage people in. And one of the things that academics quite like to do is think about how whatever it is you're saying relates to whatever it is they do. And so I think an invitation in an abstract for relating it to their own context, and also, and you could say it's implicit in the fact that you're going to a conference, you're going to listen to something, so that's what you would be doing. But I think giving it in a more explicit way, and also, say for TEAN, where we have people from the 4 countries of the UK, but also beyond, I think also making sure that there's a clear reference, even if your study is conducted in a very specific geographical area within specific curricular frameworks or government frameworks, that invitation will be in the piece for people to think about it in relation to their own frameworks.
Good, yeah. I mean, I think you're being very gentle and polite, and that's very diplomatic of you. I mean, what you're saying there is that there are 2 aspects of this paper, right? It seems to me. One is it's in Scotland, and one is it's in DT, right? And the audience for TEAN is much wider than that, right? So it's okay in the article to have a very, because you know it's in a particular place, it's published in a specific place for that. But in a conference, you've got to say, what's in it for me? You know, why I'm a geography and maths person. Why am I going to go to a DT paper, right? So it needs to say, well, this is about, say, teacher knowledge, or this is about curriculum, this is about initial, something that's of importance to me. And I think you're being very diplomatic about it. I think this is right, that this is specific, was in a particular context where it was published. So that's the difference, I think. That's really helpful between a specific publication in a particular journal and where you're going to get a lot of readers, possible readers, and you don't mind if 90% of them ignore it, because you're still getting the 10% that you want to speak to. But at a conference, you're trying to attract an audience to come and engage with your paper, right? So I think, you know, that is a key moment there. Thank you for that, Pippa. That's really helpful. Okay, and we do, colleagues, we need to be able to discuss this. We don't want to be defensive about the abstracts. You know, that's good. That's a really helpful point. Any other points on this abstract, this first abstract, before we move on? Any other questions or comments? Okay, so
it's certainly been helpful for me, Pete, actually, because we do sometimes short a time. We think, oh, I've got this, let's rehash that, let's trot that out. And those of us who've been at conference and sat through stuff, you can normally tell the difference between somebody who's, I think they call it salami slicing, don't you? You've taken something and they've tried to put a spin on it or shoehorn it into a conference, whereas somebody's really thought through it. And TEAN is very supportive. We don't reject many. We try to get as many through as possible, but by taking that little bit more time over it and redeveloping it and recrafting it, you'll get a much better experience too. So
yeah. Okay, look, let's have a look at this short abstract. I think it's 135 words. This is in a this is Kevin Proudfoot and Pete Boyd, so it's in a just recently published paper in Professional Development in Education. And it's well, have a read of that. I'll give you a couple of minutes just to read through it. And this is recently published. God help me if there's any spelling mistakes or anything like that.
Pete, just while people are having a look, Karen put a question up saying, and Pippa might be able to add to this as well, would TEAN accept a scholarly personal narrative?
Yeah.
My feeling would be yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about being scholarly about it. That's the key. It could be a reflexive narrative, but about practice, but it needs to, or about your own experience and identity or whatever, but it needs to have some scholarly underpinning. That's what we'd be looking for. So what do you notice about this abstract? It had to be, I think, probably under 150. So we could have had another 15 words. I don't know why we didn't, but anyway, that's what it ended up. You know, it would have gone through review. It went through 3 cycles of review, and we edited it along the way. Anybody notice anything about this? What do you feel about it? You can be blunt about it. You know.
I've put my hand up to say that as a teacher educator with a specialism in English, for me, there are too many words that I need to think hard about for it to be readable.
Excellent. Again, being very diplomatic, I think, right? So it's pretty jargon. There's quite a lot of jargon in there.
Yeah, and I can understand that because you've had such a short limit of words, you need to make every word count immeasurably. So you're trying to, you know, use really specific terminology that if you do understand it, you'll know exactly what it means. But for the newer teacher educator, and certainly for teachers, this would put them off, I think.
Oh, yeah. Although I do think that the first question, which,
absolutely,
which
the question is brilliant.
The first question is at least a reasonable introduction.
Yeah,
but
that's a great hook.
Oh,
that's a great hook. But then I think, oh gosh. And I have to say, on the second reading, I understood more. But it was, it gave me an insight into what it's like for some of my former pupils and some of my students who have English as an additional language when trying to read something I've presented to them.
Yeah. I mean, you know, so that's right. So the audience, I mean, I think, to be honest, when I have done some work on this for TEAN, I'm not presenting it TEAN, or I don't think Kevin's going to come and present it, but I did imagine the other night, just in a, you know, I just spent 20 minutes going, okay, what if this was TEAN? I've got 250 more words. What shall I do? And I'll show you that in a moment. But I didn't change the words much, I admit. I mean, this is it's been scored by Glasgow as a 3 or 4 star paper for the ref, okay, for the research audit. So, you know, in a way, Kevin would say, well, I don't mind. I'm writing for other psychology research, educational psychology researchers. So if it's pretty tough, it's tough because it's tough. You know, it's a concise, you know, it's a big paper that we were trying to summarize, a big study. But look, you know, I really take that on the chin. That's fine. And I really appreciate that, your comment. That's very helpful. So I agree that for TEAN, this would not help to attract an audience, the jargon in it. Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? How much of it we go on, Rosa?
I really liked it, and I think I would definitely go and listen to these because it's really, really clear. And it's saying what they're going to do. It says how they've done it, and it says what they're going to tell you.
Yeah. That's the old thing, isn't it? Tell them what they're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what they...
I thought I would definitely go if it was in a conference abstract.
I think I like it because it's got a bit of edge, right? It's partly about the neoliberal context, you know, the managerialism. It's got a little bit of edge there, you know, and a bit of hope as well.
But I think from the abstract, you can tell there's a 3-4 star paper.
Right, maybe, hopefully. Debbie, what were you going to say?
Oh yeah, no, I really like it. I get the English teacher, like the lens for sure. And I was also thinking if it was going to be for, like we were saying earlier, like I had a quick read of the article so I could see like Ryan and Decky and those sorts of things for the references. I've got a question about the last sentence and I'm also coming from personal experience in terms of that whole question, like what's in it for me, right? Yeah. What's in it for school leaders? Because this is very disruptive, right? If you're encouraging teachers to regain their sense of autonomy, professionalism, and agency, that creates a real problem for school leaders, because then essentially teachers aren't doing what they're told. I'm serious. So no, like genuine question. What? Obviously, I'll read the article and think more about it. But is that relevant at this stage, or is it more, you know,
I suppose
to unpack?
I think that you've kind of, in a way, even when you read the paper, if I'd been a reviewer, with hindsight, looking at it now, I'd say, well, that's pretty weak, that final sentence. Give us a concrete example of what you mean by that, right? So what I mean by that is that even if I was secretly a really managerialist school leader who was instrumental, by the way, the other paper is about instrumental motivations, right? And teachers are, to some extent, motivated by some instrumentalism. So it's not, you know, the other paper, which goes with this, which hopefully will get published soon, is kind of complements it in a way. But look, on the vocation, this is the concrete example I might give. I might say, no matter how determined you are to lead change in your school, you're going to need to you need to show appreciation of their commitment and listen to them and involve them in change in such a way that it's more collective and collaborative, even if you are quite in a hurry and in a kind of, you know, instrumental way, you think you know the answers, it won't work as well if you don't harness their commitment to children and their commitment to teaching in itself, right? So on the instrumental side, by the way, the commitment to teaching, teachers do like to have their teaching expertise recognised in a very, you know, specific praise way by senior leaders, right? So that's all I'm saying, is that it's yeah, but I do agree that the paper itself is weak. That last sentence is worth asking. It isn't clear enough to me for to attract someone to the presentation, because you can't see quite what you're going to get out of it, even especially as a school leader, maybe, you know. Anyway, look, thank you. That's very nuanced, and I think I like that. I like that. I mean, one of the things I want to suggest is this: with hindsight, I'm looking at it. Only a third of the abstract is about the study or the problem. 2/3 is about the findings and the implications, and so we probably got a bit carried away with that. You know, like a lot of it is about the findings. Now, we can defend that. That's okay. But it's interesting to read it. I think for a research conference, they would have come back if that was, you know, BERA, they would have said, we need more on the methodology here. You know, we don't know what you've done. You know, we don't know what the study is based. So, right. So it's interesting to see that because we got it published in a way, we can afford to be a bit less balanced than, remember the list that Richard set out with all the different parts of the study? Well, we've squeezed, you know, we got to number 4 or 5 in the first couple of sentences, and then we spent more time on the rest. Look, when you are actually presenting in a conference, you've got a right. You don't have to labour through your whole project. So you could actually go in and say, look, we basically did a teacher survey for 335 teachers, and we used an attitude scale based on self-determination theory, but frankly, it was about what motivates them to learn. What I'm going to do is share some 6 bits of data with you and show you how we interpreted them, right? And what, you know, and so then the next slide is a factor analysis, you know, result, and you go, so here's the factor analysis, blah. So you just skip through all the methodology because you've only got 15 minutes of fame, so you don't want to spend the whole, you know, you don't want to have to labour through. And if you watch a PhD student who hasn't been properly prepared, they will run out of time on slide 16. They've got another 16 slides. That's no good. 1 slide per minute is probably as much as you can manage, except for very specific situations where you're kind of doing that Pecha Kucha thing, you know, where you're using lots of slides to illustrate a talk. Generally speaking, if you're talking to slides, 1 a minute, other people can come in and contradict me if you like. 1 a minute is probably about as much as you can manage, right? So be careful about that. Okay, so look, I mean, I just share with you, perhaps, if I can, I'll go to share and see if I've got my other slide. I'll show you what happened when can you see that now? I tried to add, I got to 362 words, and look at all the methodology. I'm only just realizing this now, that this is what I did, by the way, but I think there's a lot more about the sample and about the methodology and the approach to analysis. And then I just left the findings in pretty much, and the implications. I tried to add something at the end. So was it Debbie? I think that I said the nature of teachers' vocation to teach and how that might best be harnessed. So it's still vague, but at least I was trying my best to kind of, you know, to kind of help with that idea of what are they going to take away? Yeah, what are they going to take away? Look, let me stop sharing anyway. So. All right, so let's check the time now. So we've had, it's 5 o'clock. We've had a discussion of a couple of abstracts. If is anybody, that's very helpful to, I think, for us all to look at the same things, you know, because then it helps. We need to somehow share those slides, so we need to make sure we can get everybody's email probably. Let me think. How can we best do that? Because I haven't got your emails because the registration. Bex has got that. I haven't got access to it. So we need to think about that. And we need to also open up for a discussion of, you know, of your your titles, what you're presenting. Just go round a little bit. If you're willing to share that with us, just tell us what are you. You can't spend 10 minutes telling us. You just got to tell us, oh, I'm thinking of something about this. I'm looking at a paper or a conference proposal around such and such a thing. And what has this talk so far? Have you learned anything from this talk? What do you think we all do in terms of your own work that you've learned from today? That's what we'd like to ask you. Yeah, I think there's a slide that says that, but you don't really need it. What we're saying is, when we go round the table now, would you like to comment, if you like, if you're willing to comment on something you've picked up that might affect the way you think about your own work or the presentation of your own work? Clear as mud? Let's ask Claire first. Let's ask everybody, right? So let's keep an eye on me, Richard, to make sure we ask everybody. Okay, so Claire first. Claire,
okay,
tell
thanks,
us something
Pete.
about what you're studying. And
it's been really helpful. And actually, similarly to Richard's colleague who had finished their master's thesis, I've just finished mine, and I'm just for the first time ever trying to think about how to distill my 20,000 word dissertation into a paper, and hopefully to present at conference. And having been to TEAN a couple of times, that's where I'd like to present first. So it's been really useful to get that advice, and actually to see the paper that came out of Lisa's research and think about how mine might be similar and mine might be different. So mine was about the changes in reading pedagogies in primary schools due to the pandemic and post-pandemic. So this idea that whereas we know already, the knowledge we know already is that reading for pleasure is probably the best thing we can teach our children to do. Despite that, the pressures of lost learning have meant that we have to prioritise, or not teacher educators, but our school colleagues have prioritised phonics and comprehension skills. So it was a mixed methods piece of research with an online survey and questionnaire, followed by in-depth interviews, similarly to Lisa's. So it's really nice to kind of have that model almost of what bits of your dissertation you put in and what bits maybe you leave out. So very helpful for me.
All right. I mean, one of the problems with academic studies, like a PhD or an MA, part of it is, like typically, even when I've done a research project, I've ended up with 18,000 words, and I've got to write a paper that's 7, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to be brutal, but also we do have something called PhD-itis, which I think perhaps you picked up a little bit in the abstract. So Kevin he's my colleague. He's a very experienced colleague, but he was my PhD student. So you get those words, don't you? They have meaning for you,
yeah.
Right? So Kevin can talk to you for half an hour about introjected regulation, which is one of the forms of motivation in SDT. He could talk about that for half an hour off the cuff, right? So you're full of that stuff, and now you've got to communicate the meaning of it, and also the more important bits of it to an audience. So you've got to really be aware of PhD-itis, that you sort of know the stuff, you're the expert and they don't. So you've got to now use plain English. Complex ideas in plain English is the key,
That's it.
So thanks for your comments. Okay, so I'm just going to go around the screen now. Debbie, tell us something that you've learned and that you're working on, or whatever.
Yeah, okay. So I'm working on, I'm a teacher. I'm like a A-level teacher in a sixth form college, and I'm like just been on a bender for the last few years, basically doing what you've all written about. So Richard, that whole concept of teachers becoming teacher educators, that's like my experience, and working in more formal communities of practice within our college, just sort of basically kind of developing this stuff, and have sort of started bringing in collaborations with pals, colleagues. So my basically like a friend stroke colleague at Goldsmiths has been developing this kind of stuff around writing to learn, so sort of free writing. So the abstract that I'm going to present with him to TEAN is around the experience of this kind of concept of free writing, so writing without stopping, writing without thinking, for 5 minutes,
Okay,
some
cool.
sort of Peter Elbow stuff. And how is that basically kind of freed up I guess I need to be clearer, and maybe you good people can suggest. We've done it with students in the classroom. We've done it with ourselves as a community of practice.
Excellent.
We've got findings on both. And I guess firstly, I'm not sure whether we just focus on one. My sense is not, but you know, does it make us better writers? Does it improve our students' writing achievement? And an unintended consequence, which I'm kind of, I guess I'm trying to come across now, is it's given us a real sense of agency that was unexpected, and kind of, again, just sort of sense of control. So that's where that's at. I don't have a master's or a PhD or any kind of training and research, so I'm just pulling on these guys and just working with my people and trying to cobble it together. So kind of the opposite of Claire's trajectory.
No, it's good. It's good. It's really interesting. It makes me think about, obviously, well, not obviously, but I have got all the books on writing, so I can go back to the original guy. I can't remember his name. About free writing, and then
Elbow.
I've got Elbow. That's it. A very old book, and then I've got. I mean, Rowena Murray was a big influence on me. I went to one of her boot camp writing retreats, and since then, first me and now Pippa is running writing, boot camp writing retreats in Rowena Murray style, if you like, and adding our own spin on it. But I was also thinking, you mentioned about agency. The idea of free writing is something to do with agency. Well, there is that Scottish, what's his name? Richard, the teacher agency. Look up teacher agency. I've forgotten his name, but it's really good model.
Mark Priestley was writing with Gert Biester. So if you look up teacher agency and Mark Biester, and
there it is. Okay. Yeah. Tracy's got the book. Have a look at their model for teacher agency. Maybe because you mentioned it, right, it made me think, oh yeah, free writing maybe is an empowering thing, right? Because stuff. You put in this discipline of free writing, and then stuff, and it starts to reveal itself through having to and allowing yourself to, instead of thinking, oh, I've got to make this sound very academic and I've got to be very formal and all this kind of thing. So you're kind of, free writing is kind of a warm-up exercise that might empower people through giving them a sense of agency, right? Maybe. I know that's something worth thinking about. So when we say a theoretical framework, that's the kind of thing, in a simple way, that's the kind of thing we're thinking about. Obviously, you've got to try and make that coherent with your methodology, but that's going on to PhD level. So thanks Debbie, that was great. So we'll have to keep moving round.
Just quickly, Tracy, what was that book you waved? I wasn't quick enough to get it down.
Mark Priestley. Teacher agency. Priestley, spelt like a Catholic priest.
Put it in the chat, Debbie.
Okay, well done. Rosa, you got your hand up and you're next on my screen anyway, so go on. Put your mic on.
Sorry, Pete, I don't know how to unmute myself. I do know now. Super helpful for me. So, but I do have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm about to submit a proposal for the TEAN conference.
Yeah.
But I have not done the research and I've not analysed the data yet.
Right.
So I cannot write any conclusions.
No. Okay.
Is that going to be a problem?
No, but it can be a problem with big conferences. So for some conferences, right, you're trying to get into BERA, and you're in the middle of the data collection, right? So you can't really signal the findings very easily. But what you can do,
and I've done that for BERA because the deadline is such a long time before.
But what you can do is, first of all, be really clear about stuff. So don't be vague about your sample, about the thing that you're going to do, how you're going to analyze the data, and just be really upfront about it. Don't try and blur it a bit, right?
Right.
But also, you can say then, say the second part of your abstract, you've got all those numbers and you think, oh, well, how can I answer numbers on Richard's slide, 5, 6, and 7, whatever they were, implications, blah, blah. But you can signal what areas you're hoping to, what you're hoping, how you're going to contribute. So if you can strengthen numbers 1 to 4, like the theoretical framework, what research we already know, why the problem is important, and then you can say, so what we're trying to do through our study is contribute to this area here, and that's where we'll be aiming to contribute. So you can sort of use the word aiming to soften your claim, but you can say what we're looking at, and you might be doing something new, like I talked about, say, student teacher voice. Say there hasn't been enough.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. So then
I'm
you can
doing
say
something similar about the DT one, and it's about primary and secondary trainee teachers working together. But we have not analysed. We will have by the time the conference is. So would you be honest to say?
Yeah, you've got to be straight about it. And if BERA reject you,
can I just say the sentence, we have not yet analysed the data, because that would not.
I would put everything, rather than putting negatives in, I would just say the data collection, the second stage of data collection is in progress, and data analysis will be completed before conference. Do it all positive, right? Really say what you're going to do and go for it. If you got rejected by BERA, because don't forget, it's very competitive. I mean, you know, if you've ever get the chance to review for BERA, you'll find it's very competitive. Sometimes, you know, they might say, okay, well, this looks interesting, but because we'll, you know, hopefully they'll offer it next year when they've completed the study. So don't think of, you know, don't worry about rejection. Go for it and try and get in, but try not to get too entangled in it, you know.
Sorry, Pete, I didn't explain myself well. It's happened before for BERA that I put a conference, but this is not for BERA, this is for TEAN.
Okay, for TEAN, I don't think it'll be such a problem. What we'll be wanting you to do, say what you're going to do, say when you're going to have it done by, sort of thing, really positively. So you can say in the presentation, we'll be sharing those findings, blah blah blah, and we expect to be able to address this issue in a more nuanced way than previous studies, or something like that. So you make your claim, but you're kind of doing it in a futuristic way, and I don't think it'll be a problem. We would normally, if there's a problem with your abstract, we normally get back to you and ask you to rework it and think about what you're doing. So it's more supportive, TEAN, deliberately. You do get 2 blind peer reviews as well, though, so they can be quite severe, because they're members of the network, right? And then the committee get hold of it, and then we deal with it then. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rose. So Tracy, you're next on my screen. Would you like to say something about what you're doing and what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think I put in the chat, I got a bit overexcited and put my abstract in for TEAN a bit early, because I've just actually heard this week my date for my doctoral viva, so it's at the point that I've just submitted my thesis.
Right.
And I think I thought, oh, let's get some, you know, let's put in for a couple of conferences. So I've been accepted for one that's an international one that I'll be doing virtually, but then I thought, oh, the TEAN's on the radar, TEAN's there, so I'll put an abstract in for TEAN as well. But thinking about it now, I think I need to tighten it up and look at it again. So
okay, that's cool. Well, as I suggested, you could probably submit it again, and we'll just see that you've got 2, and then we'll see they're the same, and we'll go, you know, you could even put revised somewhere in brackets, and we'll delete that bit. So don't worry about that. We should be able to, no promises, right? Because we have a lot of submissions, but hopefully
I have presented at TEAN before and been to TEAN before, and it's a really, what I will say for people who haven't presented at TEAN, who haven't submitted for TEAN, exactly as Pete said, go for it. But it's a really safe space as well to present in. It's really collegial. It's not brutal at all. It's not, dare I say, snobby or anything like that. It's
everyone really... there is a teacher educator, so we're all in the same tribe.
Precisely.
Whereas when you go to BERA, you've got some people who are professional researchers, right? They wouldn't be able to teach year 9 if you gave
on a
them
Friday afternoon DT. No.
Yeah, no, they would not be able to do a DT lesson. No way. So you know, you've got a real mix of people, policy people and researchers and managers, you know, whereas TEAN is well, there's lots of leaders and managers, but they're all teacher educators. Okay, so thank you. Daniela, would you like to say something about what you're thinking or what you got from the workshop, or anything really?
Hello everyone. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Richard. This was really, really helpful, because I've never actually submitted an abstract for a conference, and I've never actually seen an abstract for a conference. So actually I've seen an abstract for a conference, so I have a much better understanding what I'm actually expected to do, because I did not have this understanding before. So it was revolutionary for me in that sense. And we'll be thinking about actually putting an abstract together and possibly submitting on the basis of what I've done last year for my fellowship.
Okay, we would really encourage you to do that. Go for it, you know, and yeah, try and have B's are easily distracted. Well, obviously that's not going to be your title, but something along those lines. We'll be really, really keen on that one. Okay, so go for it. All right, thank you, Daniela. Fiona,
Thank you.
Fiona, what were you thinking? What comments have you got?
Hello, this has been really lovely. I just wanted to say thank you because it's just lovely. It's been really transparent. I've managed to get a couple of proposals in at a couple of other conferences and present, but I think there are just so many social and cultural capital elements to this that I'm not aware of, and I know that, for example, PERA is a bit of a nightmare to try and get accepted at, and I've not really understood why. So some of your little comments about they'll want to see more of this or more of that, that is really massively helpful to me, because you know, that information has been opaque to me, if you like, up until this point. And I think at the back of my mind, when I've been reading other people's things, I've always been really grateful if something is written in a very straightforward way. I have no problem with academic language when it's for accuracy, but when it's just to posh something up, as the case may be, I find it a bit exasperating. So it's really nice to have that affirmed as well. Currently, I teach on our inclusive curriculum design module on our PD Cert academic practice, but actually I'm a neurodiversity specialist and a director of the National Association of Disability Practitioners, so I'm quite unusual in that I'm involved in teacher education, but I'm also a professional services member of staff, which is a bit strange. I had a brief moment at the TEAN conference last year, but unfortunately it was, if I'm honest with you, it was probably as painful as shutting my fingers in the door over and over again, because there were meant to be 3 of us presenting and my colleague was really ill, like properly ill. So dropped out at the last minute and just left, and she was leading it, so there was just 2 of us. And the other person said, I said to the other person, I'd feel better if we were honest and just said, the main presenter's sick, this is what we've cobbled together with what we've got, because the main presenter had all the slides and everything. And the other person said, no, because people will look for faults if you do that. And honestly, I think I died on my backside. So I have unpleasant memories from that. So if I put in anything to you again, I'll be dead confident that I've practiced it to death. and I've got the timing perfect, otherwise I wouldn't have the balls to do it. I'm a master's student. I'm just finishing off my thesis. It's soft systems, and it's about the implementation of a disability equality action plan, organisation wide and hopefully sector wide. So I'm looking at things like race, equality charter and Athena Swan and things like that. And I'm really sort of interested in eventually developing that into a doctoral study as well. But it's all about involving disabled and neurodiverse people, staff and students together in transforming an organisation's culture. And it really feeds into the stuff I'm doing on the PD Cert academic practice with the inclusive curriculum module.
Yeah, well, that I think cultural change is very interesting, and I mean I know it's anecdotal, but up in Cumbria, she left actually, but we had because my partner works for the trust, we had a brilliant leader. She did one of those values things, you know, and everybody, you can see the people at the back folding their arms straight away and all that. But in fact, she did it brilliantly, and it was really transformational, and it was really interesting. I was getting commentary on this new, would she be the CEO or something of a trust, you know, really leading cultural change. I like that idea of soft systems. You know, I think these things can be like a hard document about, say, the values of an organization or diverse policies on diversity or something, can be, like I like the idea of a soft system. I like the topic. I think it's very important for school as well. And in fact, Pippa's research is about cultural change, but to do with growth mindset and attitudes to intelligence within a school. But it's a similar idea of cultural leadership, I think. Probably I'm quoting the wrong thing, but Pippa can tell us about that. But I mean, the point is, I think that's it sounds important work and interesting. And but then you've got to try and explain it in 100 whatever words you've got. So that good luck with that. Okay. Soft systems are easily hijacked. Soft systems are easily hijacked. How about that one for a bit of a negative slant on it, you know? Anyway, thanks very much, Fiona, for your comments. And I would encourage you to come back to TEAN and maybe share the slides a week before, and that would be good, right? So let's go down. I'm still looking at a list of people. So Donna, are you there? Can you speak to us, Donna, and maybe show your face or at least speak to us?
Hello.
Hi, Donna. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm actually not very well. I'm full of flu today. Do apologise if I have to cough. I'll just mute myself. It's been really interesting and insightful for me. I'm a PhD student. My supervising professor is Sally Elton-Chalcraft.
Oh, okay, cool.
So I only found out about this webinar this morning in my supervision, but luckily I've been able to join. So I've been it's been recommended to put in an abstract to the TEAN conference, right. And I hadn't really thought beyond that. So this has been really insightful to me, giving me a starting point. Knowing what I should be aiming for, right. But also listening to everybody else's experiences as well, positive and negative. I've picked up some really good tips, and I feel like it's something I'll definitely apply for.
Okay, well, we really encourage you to have a go, and don't. And as I say, you will be peer reviewed in a blind peer review by 2 people, but you will also have a committee member responding to that and making sure then that we offer some sort of concrete. We do turn some papers down, but it's usually for technical or focus reasons, not to do with the actual quality of the abstract, you know. So we'll support you if your abstract needs a bit of tweaking. But if you can try and share it with Sally first, then that should sort it anyway. She is on the committee. Okay, so you've got an insider there, so you've got an advantage. Okay, so thanks very much, Donna, and thank you for commenting. And so I've got, say, Helen. Are you there, Helen? Would you like to say something? What are you thinking about your own work now?
Hi, good afternoon, evening, in fact. Yeah, very informative, particularly regarding the short and snappy, I suppose, hook that you've advised us all to do. I'm a postdoctoral student by over a year now, teacher educator, and I was struck quite quickly by not being somebody that should hold this imposter syndrome that I do all the time, right. Where my doctoral thesis was picked up and recognised internationally within 3 months of its publication. But it had a very long title. It was quite a complex piece of work, as I suppose most doctoral pieces are. But outside of that, this is my point, Pete, is that I was doing some pre-warm-up Viva work, and I presented to a big field, and the title was Never Trust a Truth. And
very good.
It hooked so many people in, because when you put it on the screen, they sort of knew what I was talking about, but they didn't really, because it was just one aspect of a sort of conflicted belief that, you know, these truths that nobody really challenges because everybody think it's true, and it's actually not true. So those are the things. And also probably I need to, you know, I've just had a BERA blog live with written with a colleague that's had a good traction. So maybe I need to get out of still the imposter syndrome and at least put a few more abstracts in.
Yeah, and also try and, I mean, you know, that long title, you know, was for a particular purpose and audience, right? So Never Trust the Truth, maybe that you could still have room for a colon with a little bit of, you know, contextual explanation after it. And I mean, also, I agree with you that we all want to hear your presentation now. So so that's a good example of a powerful title. And yeah, and also, if it's your PhD, you know, you should try and get a couple of publications out of that. You know, that is the criteria for a PhD, that it has got publishable material in it.
Yeah.
So we normally talk about a thesis paper. So the main, you know, you might have one main argument. We might say, right, you've got a thesis paper, which means the main finding, the most exciting thing, the most, you know, the most direct thing. But you'll have to cut out so much else to get that into 7,000 words.
Yeah.
And then maybe a methodology. You might have used an innovative methodology, so you can have but you might have another paper that's more practical. And you know, I would say, I mean, I've written a couple of papers for the Chartered College of Teaching in England, you know, the 2,000 words. God, it's tight. You know, even a simple idea in 2,000 words. But Churchill stole this quote from someone else. But he said, if you want me to talk about causes of the Second World War all afternoon, I can do it right now. If you want a 20-minute lecture, I'll have 3 weeks preparation, you know. So in other words, he stole that from someone else, by the way. But and Boris then steals it from, you know, Churchill. But, you know, whatever. So the thing is, right, that you could challenge yourself and say, right, what about a BERA blog on my thesis, or what about an impact journal on my thesis? How can I sell it to teachers, and why is it important to them? Why do they need to know it, sort of thing? It may not be the right audience, but I'm just thinking that, you know, an impact journal, what we call an impact article, a professional article, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you really need that you need that thesis paper published. So you're already the world expert on your thesis, your PhD, right? You're the go-to girl for that. But to get it published then, not just in a not just, I don't mean to be rude, but get it published in a journal paper, get it open access, and then you can then tackle people and reference your own paper and say, right, this is what I'm talking about. And if you want to read more, here's my paper. It's open access. Here's my online thesis. You know, so you've got something to really back up your argument and your key points. All right. So, thanks for that, Helen. Okay, that's good.
Thank you.
Good effort. And I think I've got Eleanor next. Eleanor, would you like to tell us what are you thinking about your work in relation to all this that we've been talking about? Hiya.
Hi there. Hi, thank you for today. It has been useful, and it's been interesting as well, because Helen was my supervisor for the unit that she said I should be interested in publishing and get it out there. I didn't know she's going to be here today, so that's good.
Right.
So yes, I'm a teacher educator as well, and my work was on developing a very recent MARC model that Radovic et al. Wrote, and they wrote it as a development from the Kolb learning cycle. And I noticed that my trainees were getting a great deal of support. It's not surprising, great deal of support and encouragement and learning from one another during the informal times before I got cracking on what we were doing that session, you know. And I
so
thought, hang on,
you actually just stop talking and let them have the whole session to themselves.
Just stop talking. Right? Exactly. Just keep doing this, and thought, right, there's something here. And my big problem from my early, because I taught for 20 years, but I came through the GTP route, so I had virtually no theoretical underpinning whatsoever, or demands to produce. You know, I didn't get PGCE, I got the QTS, and so I've always felt that was a problem. So for me, it's a theory practice gap, and that's what this model helped me to address with them. And another thing that has been said today has been really interesting, feeling the pain with your trainees. So I was able to say to them, look, I'm also working on my master's unit, which is, you know, so we were able to share that too. And they were really helpful and really wanted to have a go at this. And so we focused on how to make that informal, without overdoing it, but how to make that informal time just that tad more structured. So, and it, you know, it was some good findings. So so thanks, Helen. Helen pushed me very hard at times.
Very good. I mean, I do think that formal, informal, which we talk about in terms of, say, communities of practice and learning communities and so on, it's a very fragile classification, isn't it? You know, so what we're doing, like what you just said now, I suppose you could say, oh, it's in a formal situation because we're in a, but in a way, it's very much a grey zone, you know, between formal and informal. So I wonder what could we replace that with, and that might be the kind of thing that you're working on. So that's very, very interesting. So thank you for your comments there. And I'll just finish. I've still got Nikki and Pippa, I think, to speak. So Nikki. You there, Nikki? Put your mic on. And would you like to respond to the workshop in any way? Or maybe not. You're
muted there, Nikki?
You're still muted there, Nikki. Can you undo the mic? Click on the mic. Okay, let's wait for Nikki, but let's ask Pippa. Is Pippa still there? Pippa?
I think Pepper's left as well. While we're just waiting in case anybody else wants to, because we are right.
It is 5:30 actually. So
we have got 1 minute.
Yeah.
I have just put in the chat, everybody, a couple of quick points. Firstly, I've uploaded the presentation because of technicalities with Teams. I couldn't drag in the actual file; it wouldn't let me. But what I've done is I've given you access to a OneDrive. You should be able to view it, but you could probably download it. So if you do that and save it to your desktop, the reason was that it's in my personal folders, and imagine somebody changing it.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I was trying to sort that out and I couldn't work it out. So thank you for solving that problem. I wanted to give them that handout about writing strategies. That's another issue.
Well, Pete, do you want to work out with Bex later about circulating it to all the email address? Where everybody signed up, you could send the presentation.
Did everybody here register? Did everybody register? All right, I'll tell you what, you can email me. Do you all know my email? pete.boyd@cumbria.ac.uk. I'll put that in here. Don't you put yours in. You email me and ask me for the handouts and I'll do that. That's the way to do it, yeah.
And I just wanted to say one last quick thing. I gave a quick shameless publicity push for a journal that was just been launched, and it's an online journal, but it's got it's officially recognised DOI numbers and so on. And it's for writing smaller journal pieces, 3,000 to 4,000 words, or blog style pieces, 500 to 1,000 words. And it's called a Journal of Student Social Science Research, a bit of a mouthful. But if you're doing a presentation to TEAN and you weren't going to submit to the TEAN journal, which we hope you will, or you wanted something alternate, maybe just a short blog style post based on something that's been produced through student research, then feel free to send it through. It's not an arduous process. It's sending an email with your suggestion or your submission, and you can either submit it if you've been a student yourself, as a PhD student or a master's student, or if you're supervising somebody that's done a particularly good piece of work, you can be their sponsor, their academic sponsor. It's a shameless plug because I'm one of the editors, so that's why I've mentioned it. But the journal link is there, and feel free to have a look at it. Ping me an email if you've got any questions on that. But that might run quite nicely alongside a presentation for TEAN, for BERA, for anybody else you might be presenting.
Okay, look, I think we should come to a stop now. I'm going to stop recording in a moment. But colleagues, thanks very much for your contributions, and please, we're looking forward to your submissions to TEAN, and they'll be exciting, punchy, and hopefully you'll be able to download those slides and get some guidance. And if you email me, I'll send you the slides and the handout on writing support strategies from Hilary Constable and myself. Okay, and so thanks to everybody. That's the end of this TEAN webinar. Thanks for your contributions. Lovely to see you, and hope to see you again. Take care.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks. Bye.
Merry Christmas. Bye, everyone.